Vanessa, thanks for agreeing to talk to me today. I'm Charlie Lamdin, the founder of BestAgent, and this is Vanessa Warwick from Property Tribes. Property Tribes or Tribe?
Property Tribes.
PropertyTribes.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to get straight into a conversation about the relationship between landlords, tenants, property, and society as a whole, and society's performance at taking care of its most vulnerable people. Now, as I've seen you say on video, being a landlord is first and foremost a business.
Mm-hmm.
Being a landlord is something people only do to make a profit, to generate cash. Now, there's an unfortunate, and you might disagree, please do, but there's an inherent conflict between people who are setting out to do something simply to make as much money as they can, mm-hmm. and society's most vulnerable people who are scraping together every last penny to try to, often at the expense of other essential things, just so that they don't lose their home. Now, I know that there is a spectrum of landlords, good to bad. Yeah, there aren't just good ones and bad ones. There is a gradual spectrum of them, and you get some that are incredibly kind and generous and really take a personal interest in their tenants and taking care of them and get reward out of that. And you get the other end of the spectrum where they hope they never have to meet their tenants. They hope they never have to see them, just pay the rent or go. Mm-hmm. And the same is true, of course, of tenants, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So you have a spectrum of tenants who are respectful of a property, take care of it, it's their own home. And then you have tenants who, perhaps not intentionally, but they end up costing the landlord a lot of money because of how they behave, how they treat the property, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. So both sides have an argument. They go, oh, well, landlords are heartless people, and they're just profiteering. Well, that's a sweeping generalization that's unhelpful in this debate. Mm-hmm. And the same about, oh, tenants are terrible. Tenants, they just behave terribly, blah, blah, blah. So my first question is, one of the things that BestAgent's doing to try to help make a tiny, tiny dent on this problem is to offer vulnerable people who are currently homeless or at risk of homelessness a rental guarantee to get them into the private rented sector. And my question to you is, given that more than 9 out of 10 landlords are effectively private citizens that have another job and don't do it as a living, and it's just renting out 1 or 2 properties, why, and given how many of them there are as well, why is it the case that so many landlords will reject tenants that are considered higher risk? Other than the obvious fact they think it's a financial risk, is there anything else? And do you think that this guarantee, a rental guarantee of the type I'm talking about, where, let me be specific, okay, we're offering to guarantee the rent for either 6 or 12 months, not forever, mm-hmm. but long enough for the landlord to feel comfortable that their tenant is a good one, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. So it can't be an unending one, otherwise the liability will just grow and grow and grow and balloon forever. It's got to be hopefully it's the thing that makes the difference for a landlord that goes, oh, well, yes, they can afford it. They're on universal credit, but they can still afford it. And I would take them, but it's just a bit too risky. Oh, a 6-month rent guarantee? Yeah, that actually helps tip the balance. I will take them. Am I being naive and foolish to think that this is going to make any difference at all? Or do you think that this is an idea that has a possible future?
Well, I definitely think it's an idea that could gain traction. I think, just to go back to what you said at the very beginning, the way that I describe being a landlord is landlords are paid a very slim margin, and increasingly slimmer margin, to take on the risk of the tenant not paying the rent or damaging the property. So landlords' margins are based on being willing to take on that risk. And to be quite frank, the days of exceedingly wealthy landlords, that they are in decline, because, as you know, Charlie, there's been so much legislation and taxation increases in the private rented sector since around 2015. So it's becoming less and less attractive to actually be a small private landlord. And this is causing a lot of problems, which you've touched on, in that the supply of rental properties is starting to dry up, because landlords are either leaving the sector because they've had enough, or new landlords aren't coming into the sector because the margins simply aren't there for them. And if we look at a very local level, at local authorities, many local authorities do not have sufficient social housing for the numbers of people that require them. So they look to discharge their housing obligations to private landlords. So we have such a disconnect between local government and central government. So central government has done a lot of things and tweaked a lot of levers over the last 5 or 6 years to deter landlords coming into the sector and providing private sector housing. And then at a local level, you've got local authorities absolutely crying out for private sector landlords to assist with their housing needs, and to such an extent that we're now seeing some local authorities with waiting lists of over 1,500, 2,000, and these local authorities are now offering what I call a golden welcome handshake to new landlords, to encourage them to give over their properties for local authority tenants. So it's such a difficult situation for everybody within private renting, because of this supply-demand imbalance, which actually just goes straight back to the government has not built enough social housing over decades, and no government has ever fully understood the complexities of private rented sector and the different ways that could help solve these problems. And now with this Conservative government, and George Osborne in particular, who introduced a very onerous tax regime in 2015 called Section 24, it's putting the dampers on private landlords wanting to get involved. So it's just such a complex situation. But as I said, the main thing is landlords want to be compensated for taking the risk of the tenant not paying the rent or damaging the property. That is where their margin is. So if BestAgent were to offer a rental guarantee, then I think that would be very attractive to landlords. A lot of landlords are interested in having some kind of social element to their business, or wanting to help young people, or wanting to help people that have fallen on hard times in life, and they would just like that reassurance of that rental guarantee. And as you say, even if it was just for 6 months, you could possibly build a relationship with a tenant, see that they're looking after the property well, that they are responsible, and then after 6 months, maybe if they were still struggling, you could help them move on to universal credit. So I think the main thing is, to get tenants into private sector accommodation. It's much better for them than being in emergency or temporary accommodation, which actually costs the taxpayer way, way, way more than renting from a private sector landlord. And I'm just hearing some terrible stories of people, families living in one room in a hotel with no cooking facilities, and they're having to go out to a local cheap takeaway to get the evening meal for their kids. It's totally unacceptable. And I just hope that we finally get a housing minister who actually listens to industry stakeholders and starts joining up the dots of where these problems are being caused, because they're very long-standing and they're only getting worse.
Well, it's interesting. One of the lessons I learned, I started getting to know some of the homeless people in Exeter, which I lived quite near to Exeter. And one of them told me something that had never occurred to me. He said, when you're sleeping rough, you don't have anywhere to keep a pint of milk where it won't go off. So you'll eat, the cost of eating when you're homeless is, he said, triple or quadruple what it costs to feed yourself if you've got a room with a fridge in it. It never even occurred to me. Of course, it was just, it's so hard to just exist. And the guys, so people without catering, of course, are in the same position if they're in a. That question I had: is the golden hello being offered by some councils working? Is it making any difference? Are any landlords taking it? Is it actually persuading landlords to go, okay, I'll take one of your tenants, as opposed to not?
I think it is. It is an attractive offer to a landlord. I recall being at an event in Brighton a few years ago, and I was very surprised to see Croydon Council having a stand there. I said, "Oh, you're a bit off your home patch," and they said, "Yes, we are absolutely desperate for properties. We've got so many obligations. We've got a waiting list of over 1,600 people. It's getting longer by the day, and we're going to try everything to find landlords." And then they said it actually isn't area specific, because if we met a landlord here that had a property in Blackpool, we would consider taking that property and moving our tenant to Blackpool. And I find that absolutely horrendous to contemplate, because taking somebody out of their support network, their families, their local community, and sending them somewhere completely random, it's not going to help their way forward in life at all, in my opinion. And you've got issues with children in schools, and then these people are being taken from the environments where they have these support networks, they have their kids in school, and they're just being sent somewhere up north. It just, again, these are the stories that I think that we need more awareness of, and we need more industry stakeholders and all the parties, actually coming together and trying to find a way forwards to help start to eradicate this problem, because I think it's also got worse because of the COVID pandemic as well. And when you talk to a homeless person, they sometimes it's just something really bad has happened in their life, and they've just kind of gone off the rails. And it can happen to any of us. The kind of stories you hear, they're by the grace of God and all that.
Yeah.
And they just need that little bit of support and help to get them back into society, back on track, with a roof over their head. And everything starts with having an address. You can't apply for a job if you don't have an address on your CV. You can't apply for benefits if you don't have an address. So it's always a case of trying to find a solution to get a roof over their head, and then to bring in the relevant agencies and support people who can help them get out of their very challenging situation.
So I have a YouTube channel that's called Moving Home with Charlie, and it's just intended to provide free advice and guidance to anyone thinking of moving house, and specifically impartial advice about the importance of choosing an agent. And I have this phrase: your choice of agent will change your life. I'll come back to that later. But in that channel, one of the things I've been doing is looking into the homeless. I've been vlogging the process of exploring the homeless problem locally to me. And I met a chap called Phil Richards, and he was a big issue seller. And the day I met him, he had just been, the week earlier, he'd been placed by Exeter Council in housing association accommodation in Birmingham. Now, Phil was a recovered addict, and said to them, please don't put me somewhere. But they didn't listen to him. They put him there. And he'd been there, I think, less than a week when people outside set fire to his bedroom door because they thought he was someone else. And he just ran. He left his possessions and ran back to Exeter. And I actually, there's a video on my YouTube channel where I drove Phil back up to Birmingham to recover his possessions in return for him sharing his story with me. So that thing about councils moving people wherever else there's somewhere to go. I mean, that whole experience was so eye-opening for me, so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable when you experience firsthand someone else's predicament and realise that whatever problems you thought you may have had, you just don't have any. And I actually, through luck, I actually helped him get into a safe place, a place of his own, which was awesome. So I had a question. and it's escaped me now. I've been making notes here. There's so much to talk about. So many different things to talk about here. Just give me a minute.
I do wish, Charlie, the media wouldn't try and create a wider divide between landlords and tenants. Most landlords work very closely with their tenants. I know that I do. I regard them as my customers. I have legal and health and safety obligations towards them, which I take very seriously. During the pandemic, a couple of my tenants struggled, and I did everything I could to help them sustain their tenancies. I gave one tenant a 50% rental payment for 3 months, and I gave another tenant a payment holiday for 3 months, and then we worked on a payment plan to bring them back up on track, and both tenants were able to do that and sustain their tenancies. Wow. So I think the media likes to have these clickbait type articles where there's this rogue landlord or this rogue tenant, and as you absolutely rightly said at the beginning, they are in the absolute minority. Yeah. The vast amount of landlords in the UK are decent, honest, hardworking people who have a couple of properties as a sideline, as a pension hedge or a legacy for their kids. They want to do it to approved standards. And the biggest problem that we have, Charlie, is lack of enforcement of all these regulations. So the rogues just tend to fly under the radar, carry on what they're doing. The good landlords comply with all these extra legislation and regulation, and it increases their costs. So sometimes they may have to increase the rent because their cost of providing the accommodation has gone up. So until there is much more enforcement of existing regulation and legislation, all these problems are just going to rumble along. But local authorities do not have the resources to track down these rogues unless it's very, very extreme circumstances, when you hear of like 30 people living in a 3-bed house and there's mattresses across every single bit of floor space. Yes, we're not going to call those rogue landlords, we're going to call them criminal landlords. They are the type of people that give the whole sector a bad name, and they need to be stamped out by local authorities using their very far-reaching powers, but they just don't have the resources to do it. So all of these things, it's like a load of different levers that are all being tweaked here, tweaked there. Nobody's really thinking about, well, if I tweak that lever there, what's it going to do over there? That's what's caused the problems that we're facing in this country. And until there's this much more industry stakeholder overarching support and structure to trying to solve this problem, I can't see it I just can't see it improving. And we've got a charity like Shelter, who does extremely good work in providing advice for people. Many people are vulnerable. They don't understand their legal rights. They don't know that their landlord can't just turn up at 10 o'clock at night and demand to come in to see what they're doing at the property. They don't understand these things. Those people must have access to support and legal advice and understand their rights. But Shelter's never housed a single person. And I've often thought, if Shelter provided a rental guarantee, with the significant funds that they have, not only from the government but also from private individuals who support them, again, that would encourage a landlord to take on that demographic of tenant. And I think if the landlord also knew that maybe there was a support worker working directly with that tenant, I think that would give extra comfort to landlords as well.
You mentioned two things. You mentioned the media. I think in all areas of life, the unfortunate problem is that journalists who've got to earn a living, got to write the stories that get them the clicks. That they probably don't mean to cause harm, some of them, but it's just the necessity to make money. And because I've also found the fact when I started telling the story about the homeless guys next to that kind of stuff, and looking at the views on YouTube between that and between other stuff I'm doing, which is just futile, meaningless fun stuff. The conclusion I've come to is that very few people have time to care about the homeless problem. They do care, and they say, "Oh, that's terrible," and then they go on carrying on about, because most people have got their own problems. Most people living in comfortable homes have still got debts to pay off. They've got problems, and they're all, everyone's time poor as well. And you have a lot of very generous people who consistently give their time and their money to provide relief to local homeless people. But trying to raise awareness on a grander scale tends, and I don't exclude myself from this, tends to be something that's good for publicity and never gets followed up. Which is why when I very first started doing it, I actually went and got involved with some homeless people and to see what I could do right from the word go. But the point I want to come back to is, this is actually not the topic I really want to discuss the most, but it is a good topic. All of the various stakeholders, unless they are a charity, are driven by either budget needs or by the demands of their shareholders. And everyone feels very sorry for the homeless people, but it's not their job. That's not my job. I've got my job. My job's over here. I'm not responsible for taking care of the homeless people. And this is why so many of the events that you refer to get lots of attention on the day and the day after, but then it's like it never happened. And that's why my long-term approach to this is to try to demonstrate, which is what I'm doing with the BestAgent rent guarantee scheme, demonstrate that there is actually a commercial advantage to be gained from getting involved, not for publicity purposes, but to make an actual tangible difference, whether it's to one person or to one charity or to one city, town, one council, whatever it might be. Treat it as an operating part of your business. Even if all you're doing is saying to your staff, you can give 10% of your time on an ongoing basis to supporting this problem. Or you talk to your marketing department and say X% of the advertising budget or advertising spend must include the ongoing support. So it's never just a one-off thing, a temporary thing, a night out sleeping rough to raise funds. It's a one-off. It's got to be something sustainable, and it's got to be something that is not seen by these corporations as costing them any money. Because it's no one's job to solve the homeless problem if you're in that corporation. No one has that job. Someone might be able to have the job of dishing out charitable funds, but charitable funds won't solve the problem. They only provide temporary relief. A permanent long-term solution will only come about when the people with the resources to do so decide to include this problem as part of their operation. In a way that
I totally agree, and I think it's down to CEOs to integrate this kind of philosophy into the culture of their business, because ultimately I think it will help their business and attracting talent to their business if they have this social cause. And I think people are becoming much more aware of what brands are doing in terms of the environment and so on. And we're seeing more and more companies becoming B Corps, and people understanding why a B Corps is such a great company to support with your business. And, just an example, I love an outdoors brand called Passenger, because every piece of clothing you buy, they plant a tree. And when I have a choice of going to a business that doesn't plant a tree and one that does, I feel better going for the brand that's actually supporting the environment, and they use all recycled materials and things like that. So much of this is about educating consumers about brands and looking for socially conscious brands who are moving towards higher standards like B Corporation, and investing actually in the actual culture of the business. I loved what you said about staff donating some time to local activities to support the homeless, or maybe staff raising money for different events and having different events to raise money and things like that, and just embedded into the culture of the business. And I think it has so many benefits within the business itself, as well as actual benefits within the community where that business is offering their support. And homeless people, that they're almost invisible in some ways. They're often sitting down in a doorway, and you're rushing to work in the morning, and then they're not on your eye line. You don't really notice them. And I think we all need to be aware that there are a lot of people out there really, really struggling. The problem's getting worse. The government isn't providing answers. And I think that certainly, businesses and brands can lead the way in creating more awareness of this, and creating cultures within business where people have an awareness of how important this issue is. And it works for everybody.
Yeah.
I work I sponsor a room at the YMCA, and it's only £30 a month. And every quarter I get a letter from my young person that I'm sponsoring. And it's extremely inspiring to hear their stories. It inspires me to hear of a young person who's, both their parents were alcoholics and committed to suicide. They've come back from that, and they've developed a love of, say, carpentry, and they're trained to be a cabinet maker and carpenter. And just hearing their stories is just amazing. So I think there's so much to be said for having much broader conversations around this, talking about people's circumstances, not having stigma about this, not assuming that somebody is some kind of failure because they've ended up on the street, or they did something that, to deserve being there. Many people have ended up on the street through very, very challenging circumstances, and they could be set back on a good track relatively straightforwardly if they had the support and the accommodation. So yeah, there's so much to be said around this. I don't really have any other answers, but I think your rental guarantee suggestion is an excellent one, and an easy win, easy to implement.
Great. Thank you. Now I've got two more topics I wanted to discuss with you. One of them is my research showed up that one of the significant causes of new homelessness, it's just, there are many causes, right? But there's one, is when a landlord, for perfectly fair reasons, needs to take their property back. Maybe it's because they've come back from abroad, they need to get back into their home. Maybe they need to sell it, whatever it might be. And the tenants that are evicted through it's a no-fault eviction, they weren't in arrears, they haven't done anything wrong, but they need to leave, cannot find an alternative accommodation, end up actually rough sleeping, even though they're in work. But of course, if you've got nowhere to sleep, how can you keep working? I mean, if you're a lorry driver, you try driving a lorry for 8 hours a day when you've been sleeping rough all night. It's you can see how suddenly
downward spiral.
These good, hard-working people who paid their rent find themselves freezing cold. Before you know it, they're at the bottom of the barrel. Poor things. I think there's some legislation being discussed that might create a new type of circumstance where actually a landlord cannot force someone out if they haven't got a new home. I don't know the details, and this is me asking you actually.
Yeah, well, there's the Renters Reform Bill, which has been going through Parliament for a long time now.
Does that address this issue?
It's kind of moving forward this year, and the abolition or removal of Section 21 is within that bill for the reasons that you've given. I think it is very tricky because some landlords do need to sell up, but then there could be more awareness about selling a property as tenanted. So the property just gets passed on to another landlord who takes over the tenancy. And, there's some, for instance, there's a platform called Vesta, which is a leading platform for buying and selling of tenanted properties, portfolios, blocks of flats, etc. So landlords don't necessarily have to get rid of a tenant, but very often, and I've experienced this myself, when I've gone to an estate agent and said, oh, I've got a tenant, I want to sell a tenanted property, the agent says, oh, no, you need to get rid of the tenant. You've got to sell it vacant possession. And they don't really explain why. It's relatively straightforward to sell a tenanted property. For new landlords coming into the sector, there couldn't be a safer way of getting started, because if you buy a tenanted property, you earn income from day one. You can see the tenant's rental payment history if they've paid the rent on time, and you can see how the tenant is looking after the property. So from a risk perspective, going back to what I said at the beginning, it's a lot less risky to buy a tenanted property already. Very often that property will have a letting agent attached to it who knows the tenant, knows the property, has managed it for the previous landlord. And so the tenant keeps their home and then just passes to another landlord who takes over the tenancy. So there needs to be more education about buying and selling of tenanted properties, the benefits of doing so. There's this slight fallacy that if you sell a tenanted property, you get a lot less money for it. I don't believe that's true. And if you are selling a tenanted property, you're earning rental income up to the day of completion. And if you choose to sell vacant possession, you could wait 3, 4, 5 months to complete that sale, whereby you're paying the mortgage, the standing utilities, the council tax, etc. So people need to understand the pros and cons of both situations. Then there's also, the possibility of some government-supported scheme, but whereby the tenant could actually buy their rental home. So maybe there could be a tax incentive to landlords to get a capital gains reduction if they sold the rental property to their tenant. So, these are all the ideas that are in the melting pot, but they're not, they're not widely known, not really getting much traction. I think it's very difficult if a tenant is given notice through no fault of their own, and then they struggle to find another landlord to take them on. They may not be able to access social housing for the reasons that we've discussed. And as you say, once they're out of rental accommodation and they're sofa surfing or whatever they're doing, going back to the parents or whatever it may be, it's very hard to get back into private rented housing. So, there needs to be more thought about this, joining up the dots.
BestAgent's primary objective is to promote the value that good agents add to both sellers and private landlords, as opposed to institutional landlords, which is a struggle because the media paints them in such a bad light that there's always this isn't it fun to bash estate agents. But actually that's a counterproductive thing, because as I suspect when you find a great agent, they're worth their weight in gold. Right? Absolutely.
I'm still working with agents that I started my portfolio investment career back from 2004. So I've got a couple of agents where I've been working with them for over 18 years, and I regard them as a partner in my business.
So the question I've got to ask you is this: what I know, because of what I've been doing for the last 20 years, plus more recent research and the people who've actually used BestAgent to sell their house and had outstanding results, is, can you share your experience of the difference between, let's just disregard the rogue agents and the bad agents, but the difference between an ordinary agent and a great agent? Because I'm trying to promote to the consumer, to property owning consumers, whether they're selling or renting, that the best decision is always to go the extra mile to find that agent that's going to really look after you. And what's the difference as a property owner between finding that person that just takes care of you and just being one of a number of an agent that's got, do you see what I mean? So the difference between an average agent and a great agent from a landlord's point of view, because I've seen that there's this rapid rise of sites like OpenRent that are allowing consumers to just rent out their own property and avoid using an agent. And there are a lot of agents who don't do themselves any favour by being very crap There just are plenty of crap agents, and first-time landlords won't know how to tell the difference between a crap agent and a great agent. But I would love, because you're obviously very experienced as a landlord. You've worked with agents. What would your advice be to someone, especially a first-time landlord who's found themselves in a position for whatever reason that they want to rent out their home?
Well, there's a very long thread on Property Tribes about how to vet a letting agent and why you should, which I started many years ago, and it's been added to and added to. I think, first of all, that there's a few key things for me. First of all, always look for an agent that has the mandatory legal requirements to operate as an agent, and that means being a member of an independent redress scheme. There are two of them. There's the Property Ombudsman and the Property Redress Scheme, and all letting agents have to be members of those independent redress schemes. It's mandatory, as I said. So they have to display the logo of the scheme that they're a member of on their website and also in their premises. Additional to that, I tend to look for agents who have voluntarily committed to higher standards, such as being a member of an industry body such as ALA, the Association of Residential Letting Agents, or another one is Safe Agent. That they don't have to be members of those organisations, those trade bodies, but they have voluntarily committed to higher professional standards because these organisations offer training and so on. So those are two key things. A third for me, just on a personal level, is communication. I want agents to actively and proactively communicate with me, and if I get in touch with them, I want a response within 24 hours. And it's important that I get that because it's also an indication of how they might respond to my tenant. So I want agents to be very easily contactable and very proactive in contacting me if I need something or I've left a message or something of that nature. So communication for me is one of the fundamental things. The next thing I would say is I like agents that come to me. There is a problem, but they've already come up with the solution. So my example of that might be I'm just refurbing a flat in London, and the agent went there, and the fridge was in a very bad condition, or a lot of the bits inside were missing. You know, the things in the drawers and things like that. It was very hard to clean. It hadn't been looked after. It was not working properly. The agent wrote to me with some photos of the fridge inside and out and said, look, Vanessa, I think you're going to have to replace the fridge now. It's not up to scratch, but these are the fridges I've researched that fit in that space. Here's one for 230, here's one for 240, here's one for 280. Which one do you want to go to? And then for me, it's just very easy to say, actually, I'd like to go for that one. Or, I may have my own supplier that I want to use, and then I say, well, could you go and order it from this person because I've worked with them before. So I like agents that when they come with a problem, they've already thought of the solution.
Absolutely.
And I think the final thing is they are an agent, and what an agent does, it represents you. So I want my agents to treat my tenants in the same manner that I would treat my tenants if I was directly engaged with them. So I want agents that are respectful to tenants and who, are going to be understanding if there's a problem. If somebody doesn't pay the rent on time, you don't jump in with your size 9 straight away. You get in touch with the tenant and you say, look, I notice, you haven't paid this month. Is there a problem? Is there anything I can do to help you? It could be a completely legitimate reason why they haven't paid. It could be anything, there's been issues with banks and, or their business was late paying them or whatever it might be. Perfectly legitimate reasons. It could be that they've had a bereavement or, some kind of crisis has happened in their life and they've dropped the ball a bit. That's not a reason to, jump on them. You need to find out what's going on, and you need, again, in the first instance, to show compassion and empathy and see what you can do to help them through this difficult patch. And when you work with people like that, they want to continue working with you, and it often strengthens the bond between landlord and tenant and agent if you can all work through this difficult period, particularly, you know, when the tenant has been there for 3 or 4 years and they've paid the rent every single time on time, every single month for 4 years, and then they miss a payment. There's probably going to be a legitimate reason behind that, and you need to be able to get in touch with them and just sound out what the problem is. So those would be my key things, what I look for in an agent. And you know, some agents haven't been up to scratch, and when I've had a tenant changeover, I've taken the opportunity to move away and find a better agent.
Well, I've got some interesting insight on this for you from a different point of view. So I have been a supplier of technology and even a property management systems to estate agents of all different sizes, from one-man bands to multi-branch agents managing thousands of lettings properties. So I have seen it firsthand from the agent's point of view when they're managing tenants, managing landlords, and that kind of stuff. This is my opinion. I'm sharing this with you. I'm curious to know what you think of my opinion, but I obviously you have to find one that's got the legally required redress scheme membership. That's a given. That's a no-brainer. I definitely think that the Arla and Safe Agent are absolute ticks in the boxes, but that does not guarantee you fantastic service, right? Mm-hmm. And what I've seen is that there is no correlation between the ones who are members of Arla and better service levels. No correlation, right? It makes zero difference as to whether they're a fantastically great high service lettings agent or a terrible one. They can tick all the boxes, members of all the things, and still be rubbish agents, to be frank. And I've also seen agents that aren't members of those, and they're fantastic. They're really, really good. You know, of course, when you have one-man bands, they've got a small number of clients. They handle them all personally. There's great personal service. It's a different experience. But this is why I've built BestAgent. And this works equally for any property owner that's got to choose an agent to sell their house or an agent to let their house. Because it's always about, like, the services that estate agents and letting agents deliver are human services. They are physical services. They include a level of compassion, a level of personal understanding, a level of understanding your story, your circumstance, your situation. It is one of the industries that cannot be automated. And I actually started out 20 years ago thinking that it could be, and that's why I got into the industry. And then I learned very quickly, no, what they do is one of the few things that AI will never take over from, right? They are handling sensitive, personal, human situations. So what BestAgent does is it says if you're an owner of a property, you put your details in, and it finds your 20 geographically closest agents. Doesn't matter whether they are one-man band, national corporation, online agent, doesn't matter. If they are physically located close to you and are currently listing properties to rent in the same postcode, so we know that they're currently active in lettings, they will be given an invitation to introduce themselves. But you, as the client, as the landlord, you retain your privacy at this point. They still don't have your contact details or your property address. They know the approximate address, the property type, and that you're looking for an agent. And then they have the chance to send a video message, a recorded video message, or have a video call like this. And what I say to the property owners is, the agents who are the most proactive in responding to this invitation tend to be the ones who are hungriest and keenest for your business. Mm-hmm. And the agents who are most confident to present themselves in a video message and say, hello, my name's Charlie, I'm a lettings agent, I've been letting properties like yours for 20 years, I would love the chance to meet you, are much more likely to be human as opposed to not automated, but like those professional robots that just stick to a script and follow what they're supposed to do. And those people are much less likely to send videos, we've discovered. So there's this amazing self-selection where of the 20 agents, roughly half of them are like, that's not how I think I'm going to, no, I'm happy to just step out and cut myself out. Mm-hmm. So as a client, you get an instant, oh, the ones who are responding are voluntarily responding, they're responding personally, they're giving me a video message and a chance to actually see these people before I invite them around to my home. So it's a totally different method of shortlisting who you want to invite round to actually see your property and meet you. So you can see the person that you might be going to meet before you decide who to invite round. And the end result tends to be a far better working personal relationship between property owner and agent. And immediately, if you've got a better working relationship, you're going to get better results. Because if you like the person that you've hired to work for you, you're going to treat them better than a lot of people, as I'm sure you know, a lot of people just don't treat agents very well because they're agents. Well, you're not going to get the best out of your agent if you don't treat them well. So it's this, it tends to foster a better communication. And of course, when they meet for the first time over video, there's an instant rapport, or not, that doesn't happen over the telephone necessarily. So we're promoting the use of video just like this to help property owners and agents just have a first introduction, whilst the owners again retain their privacy. So there's no sharing of contact information until the landlord says, I like that agent, click one button and it invites them to an appointment. So it's 100% neutral. So we include 100% of agents, and the people might say, well, hang on, have you signed everyone up? No, we haven't signed anybody up. What happens is all 20 agents receive an invitation from us. They don't have to be signed up. They can then choose whether they want to get involved or not. And it's free to the agent up to the point of instruction. If you are the successfully instructed agent at that point, we then charge the agent a very small fee. But because it's totally neutral, it is in fact the only neutral service of its kind. It's much easier than having to ring around multiple agents and repeat your life story, which is the alternative. So it's quicker and easier. And as someone who I know thinks that what agents do for landlords is important, I wanted you to know about this, be aware of it and how it works. And if you think it's of any interest, then just let people know that that's something that landlords might be interested in. Are you running out of time?
I definitely think it is, Charlie. It's, when you talk about technology, property is a people business, and nobody should ever suggest that technology is going to take it over, because it's not. What it actually does is it enhances human interaction and communication and integration. And that's where, when it's used like that, it's extremely successful. And certainly in terms of tenants, they are what I would call digital natives, and they expect these kind of interactions. So, analog methods, they are dying out. COVID-19 has drastically shifted the move towards digital, or digitization of our entire sector. In fact, we're running an actual content campaign on Property Tribes this month, actually looking at all the different stages of the landlord life cycle that you can digitize. So yeah, I like what you're saying. I think it's a very interesting angle on it, because it's done from the comfort of your own home. You're not traipsing around estate agents or whatever. And it is nice when somebody's, coming to you, wanting your business, and wants to build that rapport with you, as much as you should try and build a rapport with the agent as well. I've just sold a house in Manchester, and I live in Guildford, so it's 220 miles away. And I didn't really know which agent to go for. And what I did was a kind of manual version of BestAgent, I suppose, because I went on to Rightmove. I put in my postcode of my house in Manchester. I put in 4-bedroom terraced house, and then I clicked sale agreed, and the options were listed, and I could see that there was 1 or 2 agents who were very dominant in that postcode. So I rang them up. One didn't answer the phone. One took a message and said they would ring me back, and they didn't. And the third one answered their phone and immediately started talking to me. Oh yes, we sold a house in that street about 3 weeks ago, and this is what we achieved for it. It's very similar to your property, blah, blah, blah. So yes, I like what you're saying. I think there will be an interest, from landlords. And I just think it's just another way that technology is enhancing the whole of our sector, just as we're seeing digital viewings, digital access to properties, digital signing of agreements. It's all going that way. But what you're doing, it's maintaining the people element of it as well, which I think is so important.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Vanessa, thank you for your time. Sorry, it's been a long old conversation, but it's been thoroughly enjoyable. I hope you've enjoyed it. And
I have. Thank you very much for asking me on, Charlie.
no, you're very welcome. And I hope we get to meet in real life one day. And I think at that point I'll wrap up the interview and say thanks and all the best and speak to you soon.
Thank you.